before sunrise on Farmer Avenue, Tomah, Wisconsin, a father walking his child toward a bus stop noticed something pale, moving across the residential street on all fours. Initially, the shape looked ordinary enough for his mind to supply a familiar answer, because its raised hindquarters and low front end reminded him of an enormous rabbit. Seconds later, that explanation began to collapse, when the animal crossed the road in several quick bounds, reached the opposite side, and according to an account later published by researcher Lon Strickler, rose onto two legs. Whatever the witness expected to see that morning, he did not expect the animal to remain upright and continue moving with a gait he compared to a person trying to sneak. Nothing in the published report says the creature charged, growled, pursued the family, or behaved aggressively, yet the movement alone was strange enough to make him abandon his first identification. Long claws, a long snout, white coloring, and no visible tail. Added details that made the figure harder to place, although none of those traits by themselves required anything unknown to science. Somewhere during those few seconds, an ordinary wildlife sighting became a story that would later be described as a possible dogman encounter. January 1, 2025, brought the account into public view, but publication did not bring a photograph, video track, hair sample, or confirmed second witness with it. Farmer Avenue, therefore, leaves us with an uncomfortable kind of evidence, vivid enough to picture, but too incomplete to reconstruct. Tomah matters because this reportedly happened in a neighborhood, rather than deep wilderness, while Wisconsin matters because the state already carries decades-old upright canine folklore. Importantly, the witness did not begin with that folklore. He began with a rabbit, and he changed his interpretation only after the animal stood. Significantly, movement, more than the claws, the color, or the snout, created the mystery in those seconds. One question, therefore, drives everything that follows. Why did this animal look ordinary for one moment, deeply wrong the next, and impossible to identify once it walked away from view entirely? Quick interruption before we go farther. If you enjoy investigations that let strange evidence breathe, without forcing an answer, like the video, subscribe, and support the channel, because even unresolved mysteries, apparently, have to negotiate with the algorithm. Returning to Farmer Avenue, the useful part of the case begins exactly where the rabbit explanation fails, because once the animal stomps, the problem stops being what looked like a rabbit and becomes what kind of creature could produce the entire sequence. Strip away the word dogman, and the description should become easier to handle, since Wisconsin has large mammals, pale animals, long-snouted animals, clawed animals, and animals capable of rising upright. Immediately, one ordinary possibility comes to mind, but, instead of treating it as an answer, it is more useful to see how far it survives, before the witness's description pushes back. Black bears are native to Wisconsin, and their anatomy gives the theory an early advantage, because a bear can supply the long muzzle, large claws, very short tail, considerable body size, and the ability to rise onto its hind legs without asking us to invent anything exotic. Color does not eliminate the possibility either, since unusually pale black bears are documented, and brief upright stepping is also possible. Viewed from far enough away, a light-colored bear, balancing on two legs, could look disturbingly human to someone who had first interpreted the silhouette as something completely different. For a moment, the animal on Farmer Avenue seems to settle into a familiar shape. Then, the witness's description forces the first crack, because he did not merely report a bear-like animal standing up. He said it continued moving with a gait that reminded him of a person sneaking. Describing that motion as human-like tells us what it resembled to him, yet it does not reveal how many steps occurred, how long the body remained vertical, or whether the front limbs were hanging freely. Calling the movement a sneak may reflect accurate observation, imperfect language, or simply the closest comparison available during a brief encounter. Without footage, the bear theory reaches the edge of the road and stops there. Measurements create another gap, because Strickler later repeated an estimate of roughly 6 to 7 feet upright, yet no preserved image gives us scale. Distance, lighting, and viewing angle could all alter the apparent size and shape of a moving animal, but none is documented well enough to recreate the sighting from the witness's position. Presence of the child cannot automatically become corroboration either, because the published material does not provide a separate account confirming the same details. Publicly, No available photograph accompanies the report, no security video has been tied to the encounter, no trackway was presented, and no biological material was recovered. Police records have not emerged as a central part of the case, while no wildlife agency appears to have identified an unknown animal connected to Farmer Avenue. Curiously, the neighborhood setting makes that absence more noticeable, without making it suspicious, because residential streets can contain doorbell cameras, passing drivers, neighbors, and other chances for accidental corroboration. Yet, no public record tied to this report gives us any of those things, and there is no basis for pretending such evidence must have existed and was somehow removed. Morning routines also work against the mystery, since an animal can cross a street in seconds, while most nearby people are indoors, looking elsewhere, or simply not expecting anything worth recording. Consequently, the setting gives the report intimacy, rather than proof. It puts something strange beside a bus stop, but leaves the actual sighting resting on one person's memory. Put every theory aside for a moment and return to the street, because the entire case still lives inside a sequence lasting only seconds. By the time the animal reaches the opposite side, the witness has already decided that his rabbit explanation is failing, and then the body rises, while he continues watching. From his position, whatever happens next looks enough like walking that he reaches for a human comparison, rather than an animal one. At that instant, he does not know about later internet discussion, competing theories, or Wisconsin cryptid history. He only knows that the thing he was watching no longer moves the way he expected. Everything that follows, including the word dogman, is an attempt to organize that brief failure of recognition. We do not know the witness's exact distance from the animal, how many seconds it remained upright, how many steps it took, or what he used to estimate its height. Those missing details are not abstract weaknesses buried in a report, they are the empty spaces around the one movement we need to see. Lighting may have changed the silhouette, distance may have distorted scale, and memory may have simplified a complicated sequence, yet none of those possibilities can be replayed against the original event. What survives is narrower and more unsettling. A man reported watching an animal cross a street, rise, and move in a way he could not reconcile with the creature he thought he had been seeing. Decades before anything unusual crossed Farmer Avenue, another Wisconsin road had already produced reports of something large, canine, and supposedly capable of moving upright. More than 30 years earlier, Bray Road near Elkhorn became associated with witnesses who believed they had seen a large wolf-like creature, and journalist Linda Godfrey's reporting helped turn those local accounts into one of Wisconsin's most famous cryptid legends. Some descriptions from that older cluster involved crouching or upright postures, while later retellings expanded the image into the familiar dogman figure many people picture today. Whether those Bray Road sightings involved unknown animals is a separate mystery, but, culturally, they created a ready-made category for later Wisconsin encounters involving fur, muzzles, claws, and two-legged movement. Once a category like that exists, a new sighting does not arrive in an empty room, because viewers, writers, researchers, and even witnesses may already have a vocabulary waiting for whatever they cannot identify. Imagine the same Tomah report emerging somewhere with no famous upright canine tradition, and the conversation might begin with bear, malformed dog, escaped animal, unusual wildlife behavior, or simple uncertainty. Place the encounter in Wisconsin, however, and dogman enters almost automatically, which may explain why this report traveled farther than thousands of ordinary, unknown animal sightings. Interestingly, the label also imports details the original Tomah account does not clearly support. Remove glowing eyes, pointed wolf ears, a muscular humanoid torso, supernatural speed, predatory intelligence, stalking, growling, and aggression, and the creature becomes much less like the monster many people probably imagined when they first heard the word dogman. Remaining in the stripped-down report is a large pale animal with a long muzzle, claws, little or no visible tail, an initial four-legged crossing, and a transition into upright movement that the witness interpreted as human-like. Stripped of everything added by folklore, the mystery becomes smaller, but the central contradiction remains intact. Now, let the other ordinary suspects enter one at a time, and see where each one fails. Domestic dogs survive the first few details easily, because the coat, muzzle, claws, speed, and neighborhood setting all fit, but the later height estimate pushes the animal toward the edge of plausibility. and the reported upright gait pushes it farther. Coyotes fare worse, almost immediately, because their size falls short of the description, and their tails are usually obvious, while sustained human-like movement on two legs would demand even more from the theory. Deer can explain the bounding shape and elevated hindquarters that produced the original rabbit comparison, yet the claws disappear as soon as hooves enter the picture, and continued upright walking becomes harder still to reconcile. Costume hoaxing solves the bipedal movement in one stroke, but then requires someone to cross the road on all fours in several fast bounds with animal-like proportions, turning a simple prank into a performance for which no supporting evidence has surfaced. Fabrication can explain every impossible detail, because invented stories are not limited by anatomy, but no surviving evidence shows that the witness made the encounter up. Misperception remains possible as well, although, without the original angle, distance, duration, and movement, we cannot point to the exact moment where perception would have failed. Each suspect removes part of the creature we imagined at the beginning, yet every one reaches the same unrecorded walk. Gradually, that missing sequence becomes more important than the animal theories themselves. Suppose the creature was a pale bear. No recording lets us compare the reported gait with known bear movement. Consider instead a large dog, and the missing scale prevents us from testing the later height estimate. Assume the witness misread a complicated sequence, and there is still no replay showing where four-legged movement became two-legged in his perception. Treat the report as fabricated, and evidence demonstrating the invention remains absent. Entertain something genuinely unusual, and no physical trace tells us what that unusual thing was. Every explanation reaches the same wall, not because each deserves equal weight, but because the evidence stops before any one of them can finish the job. Believers already have their dogman, while skeptics already have their bear, dog, or misidentification, and both sides can point to pieces of the report that support what they expected to find. Trouble begins with the few seconds neither side possesses, because the missing footage would not merely add detail, it would decide which interpretation survives contact with the actual movement. Proponents can build an upright canine from the gait and Wisconsin folklore, while hard skeptics can build an ordinary animal from the anatomy, yet the record itself refuses to give either camp the final frame. With video, the entire story could change in seconds. Footage showing a pale bear rising, taking several awkward steps, and returning to all fours would make the encounter unusual, but recognizable. Clear images of a canine-shaped animal, walking smoothly for a significant distance on two legs, would create a completely different problem. Another angle might reveal a large dog briefly rearing, while a different recording could show that an ordinary quadruped only appeared bipedal from the witness's position. Reality gives us none of those outcomes, leaving every theory dependent on a movement nobody can replay. That missing movement also explains why the story has lasted. Most uncertain wildlife sightings fade because they contain no memorable transformation, while this one begins with an animal the witness thinks he understands, and then changes categories in front of him. Persistence comes from the fact that the mystery is not simply what the creature looked like, it is what it appeared to become once it stood. Wisconsin folklore gives that transformation a familiar name, while the absence of physical evidence prevents the name from being tested. Perhaps the witness saw an ordinary animal perform unusual behavior. Maybe perspective, distance, or imperfect lighting changed the shape enough to make familiar anatomy look wrong. Possibly memory preserved one continuous bipedal sequence, where the animal actually shifted posture more than once. Conceivably, the witness described exactly what happened and encountered something that still lacks a convincing identification. None of those possibilities can be removed completely, and none can honestly be promoted into certainty. By this point, several questions have answers, even if the identity of whatever crossed Farmer Avenue still does not. His first rabbit comparison appears to come from posture, while that interpretation reportedly collapsed only after the body rose and continued moving in a way he did not expect. Dogman entered the story in a state that already possessed a powerful upright canine tradition, and the report spread because the transformation from familiar animal to human-like walker is simple, vivid, and difficult to forget. Crucially, the mystery survived because the one sequence capable of separating misidentification, unusual wildlife behavior, fabrication, and something genuinely unknown, was never recorded. Take away the white fur, the uncertain height estimate, the Dogman label, and every image folklore adds to the story, and the case becomes much smaller. Keep only the detail that caused the witness to abandon his first identification, however, and the central problem remains exactly where it started. According to his account, the animal crossed Farmer Avenue on 4 legs, rose upright, and continued walking in a way he compared to a person sneaking. Known wildlife might explain that sequence. A mistake in perception might explain it, or something stranger might have happened. But none of those possibilities can be demonstrated from what survives. Until someone produces evidence that replaces those missing seconds, the case ends where the witness's certainty ended, with an animal standing on 2 legs and walking out of sight,